Welcome back to Take Action News, everybody. That music means it is time for How It Should Be with Daniel Marins. And Daniel, your segment this week is about the deficit. Take it away.
Well, David, that's right. The deficit is too damn low. Yes, contrary to conventional wisdom, the deficit has gotten so low that it's preventing our economy from recovering. It's hurting the long-term unemployed. It's hurting the prospects of young people entering the job market today. And we need to learn from the mistakes of austerity and increase the deficit by increasing government spending and stimulus, rehiring state and local workers, and investing in infrastructure. That was the news this week. That was the most notable takeaway from the Congressional Budget Office latest budget projections that shocked everybody, a pleasant shock for most, saying essentially that the Obama administration's budget plans would reduce the deficit in the coming 10 years, or really up through 2020, or I should say 2023, by $1.1 trillion. But the most notable part of that study showed that, in fact, the Obama administration would reduce deficit as a share of GDP to 2.1% in 2015. Why is that figure significant? Well, because as Michael Linden, the head of budget policy at the Center for American Progress, points out, that's less than the 2.3% of GDP in 2015 that the original Bowles-Simpson plan, the archetype of Washington-style deficit reduction, recommended that their plans would achieve. So in other words, the Obama administration's budget plans, without any kind of a $4 trillion grand bargain, are about to achieve the Bowles-Simpson deficit target for 2015. Amazing. Amazing that they were able to achieve that without any of the so-called needed cuts to social insurance programs. It's also amazing that that's considered a notable target when the European Union countries only are required by their charter to achieve a 3% deficit to GDP ratio, even though they can't trade in their own currency, so they have far less flexibility. So we're talking about a very, very low level here. Now, the deficit hawks were extremely defensive this week of the idea that we don't need a grand bargain, we don't need to move forward because there's still signs that we need to taper off this kind of spending and it'll eat into our problems after that. And they have some claims that they're making, for instance, that the deficit reduction that is achieved is done through sequestration, which is not good for many different programs, many vulnerable people. That's something we've covered on this show. And that as a result, it's better off to replace those things with the mix of social insurance cuts and some revenue that they favor. They also say that this provides us very little wiggle room if the economy gets worse. I engaged some of these deficit hawks on those claims, and they said the same things. But here's why that's not credible. It's not credible because the deficit hawks always claim that the sequester, it's too blunt an instrument, it makes across-the-board cuts that could hurt the economy. And that's completely true, but they're just not credible messengers because they sucked out all the air from the economic debate in 2009 and 2010 and 2011 by shifting the government's priorities, by making it unacceptable for Democrats to oppose spending cuts, to be in favor of spending increases, by making this the issue du jour, by going on the Bowles-Simpson speaking tour, by holding their fiscal summits, by lobbying, by insisting that there was danger that there would be a run on the U.S. dollar by bondholders. And so they really aren't in a position to talk about the effects of immediate short-term spending cuts. What we really should be taking away from this is not that we need some kind of a grand bargain to replace the sequester, but that we should cancel the sequester, and that the entire project of deficit reduction has been completely overrated. And so while I applaud the idea that we've now achieved higher deficit reduction than was needed than even the Bowles-Simpson plan could have predicted, I think it's important to move beyond that and show the limits of what that's achieved by showing the fact that we've had less than we'd hoped for in terms of job growth. We still have at least 3 million people long-term unemployed, people that have been unemployed for more than a year, over 10% unemployment rate for people that are now graduating college, and of course, much lower median wages since the beginning of the recession, because when there are fewer jobs, it's an employer's market. And so what I would say is that instead of listening to deficit hawks and saying we need these social insurance cuts, You want to do long-term deficit reduction and you think we won't take care of it when the economy recovers? That's just not true. In the late 90s, we did cut Medicare's cost curve with serious Medicare payment rate cuts to many providers. We can do that going forward. Medicare's costs are down $700 billion in the next decade. Healthcare costs in the country are negative for the first time in decades, all in part because of changes to the Affordable Care Act, but essentially also just changes across the board showing that insurers can control costs at the provider level. It's what they don't do in the United States, and that's why we pay our doctors, our hospitals, our pharmaceutical companies more than all other countries in all other developed countries. If we really want to change our deficits, we should do that, and we can do it in the long term. The real crisis remains jobs. It remains the homeowner foreclosure crisis, which is holding back our recovery, and it remains the layoffs at the state and local level. So what the government needs to do is essentially say, start over, okay? Cancel the sequester, replace it with a real plan to let the economy recover. You want to throw long-term deficit stuff in there? Fine, but really make it long-term this time. Really stagger it. And you can't do that if you're operating with all these goals for the 10-year window. You just can't do that. We need serious infrastructure investment. We need serious jobs programs. And to do that, we need higher deficits, not lower ones. And that's how it should be.